Why did Buddhism emerge? The birth of Buddhism was not a coincidence. It was the result of the interplay of history, society, and culture. In the 6th century BCE, India was undergoing rapid social changes, and new ideas and philosophies began to emerge. On this land filled with turmoil, the emergence of Buddhism was a natural cultural and religious response. Let's step into that era and see how Buddhism took root and blossomed in the soil of India. 1. The turbulent times of India. To understand the background of Buddhism's birth, we must first talk about the turbulent times in India. In the 6th century BCE, India was at the center of dramatic social change. 16 major states were fighting for dominance, and there were constant wars and social unrest. This situation provided fertile ground for the clash of ideas and the birth of new philosophies. The Aryans gradually expanded into the Indus River Valley, driving the dramatic transformation of Indian society. Amid this tumultuous backdrop, many philosophers and thinkers began to reconsider: what is the nature of the world? What is the meaning of life? They tried to answer these fundamental, eternal questions in various ways, laying the groundwork for the birth of Buddhism. 2. Social changes and the awakening of thought. As the Aryans spread throughout India, the previously nomadic lifestyle gradually shifted to settled agriculture. The rise of agricultural society not only brought wealth, but also fueled a growing desire for centralized political power. At the same time, the social structure underwent profound changes. The rise of the noble and merchant classes made the once dominant Brahmanism seem somewhat outdated. Brahmanism valued rituals, priesthood, and the caste system. But these traditional teachings were increasingly unable to meet the demands for power and freedom of the new era. New systems of thought began to emerge, and the birth of Buddhism took shape amid this wave of social and intellectual transformation. 3. The rise of the Shramana movement. It was this social context that gave rise to the Shramana movement. The Shramana movement was a direct challenge to Brahmanism, with ascetics rejecting complex rituals and seeking liberation through personal practice and self-realization. This movement introduced the idea that everyone can practice, that anyone can, through their own efforts, reach the state of Brahman and self are one. This idea not only broke the monopoly of Brahmanism's priesthood, but also provided fertile ground for the emergence of Buddhism in terms of thought. The Shramana movement was not only a challenge to the traditional beliefs of Brahmanism, but also injected a more equal and internal spiritual pursuit into Indian society. 4. The emergence of the 6 heretical teachers. The birth of Buddhism was not an isolated event. At the same time, 6 philosophical schools that opposed Brahmanism emerged in Indian society, collectively known as the 6 heretical teachers. These schools had different ideas, but they shared one common point. They all opposed Brahmanism's creationist cosmology, caste system, and complex rituals. Some advocated for natural materialism. Some denied the oneness of Brahman and self, and others directly challenged the foundations of sacrificial rituals. The diversification of these ideas and the rebellion against tradition made India's intellectual scene flourish, paving the way for the birth of Buddhism. 5. The independent thinking of Siddhartha Gautama. Amid this fierce clash of ideas, Siddhartha Gautama the Buddha stood out as an innovator of the Shramana thought. He inherited the pessimism of Shamanism, believing that birth, aging, sickness, and death are unavoidable suffering, and that the fundamental problem of life is how to escape this suffering. Unlike other Shramana sects, Siddhartha Gautama not only inherited the ideas of the Shramanas, but also developed a completely new religious theory based on them. He no longer relied solely on rituals and priesthood, but emphasized overcoming the cycle of birth and death through inner awakening and practice, ultimately reaching the state of nirvana, a complete spiritual liberation. This thought of the Buddha broke through the limitations of traditional teachings, marking the independent birth of Buddhism. 6. The driving force of spiritual pursuit. The birth of Buddhism was not only a product of historical and social change, it also represented a pursuit of truth by a small group of people, especially some of the noble classes, who possessed power and wealth but still felt spiritual emptiness and confusion. These individuals were not content with material pleasures, but sought a deeper form of spiritual freedom. They did not see the cycle of birth and death as an inescapable fate, but believed that, through personal practice and enlightenment, they could break free from the bondage of life and death, leading to true liberation. This quest for truth and spiritual pursuit ultimately led to the development of Buddhism's philosophical system. The birth of Buddhism did not happen suddenly. It was nurtured in the midst of multiple social, cultural, and intellectual changes. It was not only a challenge to the religious ideas of the time, but also a reflection on the fundamental questions of life, the world, and the universe. It was the interplay of these factors that made Buddhism a completely new philosophical system. driving profound changes in the history of thought in India and globally. The birth of Buddhism was a profound cultural innovation in the long course of history. It was also a profound response to humanity's spiritual pursuit. How did it influence China? The introduction of Buddhism was not only a storm in the religious history of India, but also sparked a profound cultural, intellectual, and social revolution in China. Let's look at several aspects to see how Buddhism took root in China and transformed this land. 1. The historical background of Buddhism's introduction to China. The introduction of Buddhism was like a warm breeze from India, quietly changing the landscape of China. The earliest form of Buddhism entered China via the Silk Road during the Han Dynasty, around the 1st century AD. This was not just a cultural exchange, but also a collision of ideas. The arrival of Buddhism was not immediate, and at first, it was not widely welcomed, even facing resistance. However, as time passed, the profound ideas and compassionate spirit of Buddhism gradually touched the Chinese elite, especially during the Eastern Han period. Many emperors and nobles began to appreciate Buddhist ideas, believing that it could provide new wisdom for ruling the country and maintaining peace. Gradually, Buddhism moved from the court to the common people, becoming a part of the spiritual world of many Chinese. 2. The profound philosophical and intellectual impact. Buddhism brought revolutionary changes to Chinese philosophy, especially with the introduction of the concepts of karma and reincarnation. Let's imagine that ancient Chinese people were accustomed to viewing life as destiny, or believing that humans can conquer nature. Buddhism's teachings on causal law and reincarnation made people realize that every action influences the future, and this idea had a powerful impact. Buddhism's philosophy of emptiness and impermanence had a fascinating collision with Taoism's wu-wei non-action and Confucianism's benevolence, especially Buddhism's concept of emptiness, which reveals the relativity of the world. Nothing is eternal or unchanging. This idea is strikingly similar to Taoism's concept of nothingness, as both emphasize aligning with nature and letting go of attachments. This philosophical alignment allowed Buddhism to quickly take root in Chinese soil, eventually forming a unique philosophical system of integration of Buddhism and Taoism, blending Buddhist practices with Taoism's natural philosophy. 3. The glorious development of art and culture. The introduction of Buddhism brought unprecedented changes to Chinese art. From sculpture to painting, Buddhist art became an integral part of Chinese culture. Especially during the Tang Dynasty, Buddhist art reached its peak. Imagine standing before the murals of the Dunhuang Mogao caves. You would feel the solemn and sacred power. In the murals, the compassionate gaze of the Buddha and the graceful posture of the Bodhisattvas create a sense of beauty that transcends the earthly realm. The Tang Dynasty's giant wild goose pagoda attracted countless pilgrims with its majestic presence. It is not only a symbol of Buddhism, but also a treasure of ancient Chinese architectural art. These artworks are not only symbols of religion, they deeply reflect the influence of Buddhist spirit on China's aesthetic values. The Buddhist ideals of compassion and dignity gradually permeated the bloodstream of traditional Chinese art. Buddhist art not only changed the forms of sculpture and painting, but also influenced the design of gardens, architecture, and more, guiding Chinese art toward more abstract and profound realms. 4. The transformation of social and religious structures. The influence of Buddhism was not limited to thought and art. It quietly changed China's social and religious structures. At first, Buddhism, as a foreign religion, was not widely accepted, and some believed it was incompatible with China's traditional culture. However, the power of Buddhism gradually gained recognition, and temples became centers of religious and cultural dissemination. Especially during the Tang Dynasty, Buddhism became one of China's three main religions, alongside Taoism and Confucianism. Buddhism's concept of universal salvation provided the Chinese people with spiritual cohesion, and more individuals found solace for their souls within Buddhism. Many empires also expressed support for Buddhism, even incorporating Buddhist thought into their governance and political philosophy. It can be said that Buddhism was not only a religious force, but also a powerful cultural pillar, and its teachings, to a certain extent, contributed to the transformation of China's social and intellectual structure. 5. The cultivation of personal character and shaping of the spiritual world. One of Buddhism's most important impacts was its shaping of the individual's spiritual world. The concepts of karma and reincarnation in Buddhism led people to focus on inner cultivation and spiritual elevation. This was not just the transmission of theory, but also a call for each person to reflect on their actions and care for the peace and harmony within their hearts. The meditation and self-reflection advocated by Buddhism helped countless individuals find inner peace amidst the complexities of worldly matters. In contrast to Confucianism's emphasis on self-cultivation, family harmony, governing the country, and bringing peace to the world, Buddhism emphasizes inner practice, stressing the need to let go of attachments and eliminate desires to achieve true liberation. Many scholars sought the elevation of their souls through Buddhist practice, and as a result, their spiritual worlds became more enriched. 6. The reconstruction and integration of traditional culture. Buddhism is not just a foreign religion. Through its integration with Chinese traditional culture, it created a form of Buddhism unique to China. The most typical example of this is the birth of Chan Buddhism. Chan Buddhism emphasizes directly pointing to the human heart, seeing one's nature to become Buddha. It integrates the Taoist concept of governance through non-action and advocates achieving spiritual transcendence through inner awakening. Chan Buddhism not only became an important sect of Chinese Buddhism, but also influenced the thinking, patterns, and lifestyle of the Chinese people. This cultural reconstruction and integration allowed Buddhism to take root in Chinese soil, becoming a spiritual force alongside Confucianism and Taoism. Buddhism was no longer simply a foreign culture. It deeply integrated into the fabric of Chinese culture, driving profound changes in Chinese thought, culture, and even social structure. When Buddhism was transmitted from India to China, it not only brought new ideas, but also injected new vitality into Chinese culture. Through the collision and integration with traditional Chinese culture, Buddhism took root and flourished in China, eventually forming a unique cultural force. Whether in philosophy, art, religion, or personal cultivation, Buddhism's influence is ubiquitous. Along with Confucianism and Taoism, Buddhism helped shape China's cultural foundation over thousands of years, becoming an indispensable part of Chinese culture. That's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot to me. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.